Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of First Chapter Fridays. For this week's edition, we are going to listen to the first chapter of The Power of Poppy Pendle by Natasha Lowe. So sit back, relax, use your imagination as we listen to the first chapter of this book. Chapter 1, Poppy. Poppy Pendle was born on the floor of a bakery. Patisserie Marie Claire, the fancy French bakery in the little town of Potts Bottom. Now, people don't usually give birth on bakery floors in the middle of a Thursday afternoon, but Edith Pendle did just that. She had no choice. Even though her baby wasn't due for another 2 weeks, Poppy pushed her way out with the speed of an express train and was immediately wrapped up in a cake-scented tea towel by the kind lady who ran the shop. The customers cheered, and someone handed Edith Pendle a bag of little warm almond cakes. Sitting up in her mother's arms, Poppy breathed in deeply and reached out for the bag of cakes. Then she did something quite unexpected. She gobbled them all down, waved her sugary fingers at the crowd, smiled, and gave a contented burp. Although the Pendles didn't approve of giving birth in a bakery, no one could deny that their daughter was an amazing and extremely unusual child. By 3 months old, she had learned to walk and could carry bags of shopping up Puddle Lane to the Pendles' little brick house. At the post office, she usually caused quite a stir, leaping up and posting all the out-of-town mail through the top letter slot. "She's really advanced," Roger Pendle liked to brag to their neighbors. One late autumn day, something happened that made Poppy's already proud parents even prouder. Mrs. Pendle's sister, Vivian, had come for a visit, and it was such a pleasant afternoon that the Pendles decided to have tea in the garden. Poppy had carried out her high chair and was settled next to Aunt Viv when her mother came parading across the lawn, bearing a strange pink-tinted cake on a tray. "I've made an orange cake," Edith Pendle announced, which was a surprise in itself because she hardly ever cooked. "I got the recipe from the back of a can of tinned salmon. Apparently it's full of protein." Aunt Viv covered her mouth in horror, and Poppy gagged, kicking her feet in the air. Poor Edith Pendle abruptly stumbled forward, as if she had been pushed from behind, and dropped the cake on the grass with a splat. "Oh dear," Mr. Pendle said, a hint of relief in his voice. "My cake!" Mrs. Pendle wailed, while Poppy babbled away in her own private language. She waved her drooly fingers about, and a gorgeous chocolate cake covered in pink sugar roses suddenly appeared on the table. "Now, where in heaven did that come from?" Auntie Viv gasped. Poppy chuckled and sucked on her toes, blowing pale pink bubbles into the air. As they popped, showers of sugared almonds scattered down. "It's Poppy!" Mr. Pendle cried, staring at his daughter in disbelief. "She's got the gift, Edith! She's really got the gift! I don't believe it!" Poppy was clapping her hands together, and little chocolate doves were flying out of them. Mr. Pendle plucked one up and popped it into his mouth. "Oh, fantastic, Edith! Our Poppy's magic!" Mr. Pendle worked in a shoe shop called Happy Feet, selling shoes to the people of Potts Bottom. It was boring, smelly work, but surrounded by cheesy feet all day long, and he certainly didn't want his daughter following in his footsteps. Now they could stop worrying, because Poppy was destined for much bigger things. Crouching beside her, he stuck his face close to Poppy's. "Who's a clever girl then? Who's going to be a witch when she grows up? I'm putting her name down for Rutherford Academy first thing Monday morning," Mrs. Pendle declared. "There hasn't been a witch in the family for 3 generations, not since Granny Mabel. I'm just tickled pink. I'm so proud. I do wish Poppy hadn't been born in a bakery, though," she sighed. "It doesn't seem fitting, somehow." Poppy made a loud noise like a raspberry, and a tiny gray cloud formed and hovered about 12 inches above the tea table. "Oh, look, she's at it again!" Mr. Pendle exclaimed. The Pendles watched in excitement as the storm cloud erupted, pouring water down onto the chocolate cake. Then Poppy scrunched up her face, turned the color of an overripe tomato, and burst into tears. Straight after breakfast on Monday, the Pendles telephoned Miss Lavinia's Roach, the headmistress at Rutherford Academy. Mrs. Roach had never heard of a baby performing magic before. "This is really quite astonishing, if what you are telling me is true," she told Edith Pendle. "But before I put Poppy down on our waiting list, I would appreciate seeing the child for myself. Sometimes parents go to rather extreme lengths to get their girls into Rutherford. We are, as I'm sure you well know, Mrs. Pendle, the only accredited school for magic in the country, and we're very selective." "Oh, just wait till you see our little Poppy," Mrs. Pendle said. "I'm sure you'll be suitably impressed." So the next afternoon, Poppy was promptly brought over to Rutherford for her interview. As the Pendles were ushered into the headmistress's office, Poppy kept trying to climb out of her carriage and trot back toward the door. "No, sweetheart," Edith Pendle insisted, grasping her daughter by the hand so she couldn't escape. "Looks like she has other plans," Mrs. Roach said, smiling down at Poppy. "Well, she doesn't understand what an honor it is to be here," Edith Pendle said, tugging her daughter into the room. "This is quite an occasion for the Pendle family." "I brought this with me," Poppy's father began, carefully extracting a sheet of white paper from a cardboard tube and unrolling it across Mrs. Roach's desk. "Our family tree," he announced, bursting with pride and pointing a finger at the chart. "Well, my wife's family tree, really. That's great Granny Mabel right there." He tapped at the paper. "But I'm sure you know all about her." "Indeed," Mrs. Roach lowered her head in reverence. "What an honor for you all, being related to Mabel Ratcliffe, one of the best head girls Rutherford ever had." "And look," Roger Pendle said, breathing heavily over the chart. "Her great-great-great-grandmother, Irene, had the gift as well. You see, so it runs in the family. We can go right back to the 13th century. Certainly quite remarkable, Mr. Pendle. Now please, won't you all sit down? Ms. Roach suggested. I'll ring for some tea and biscuits. Poppy immediately climbed up into one of the chairs facing Mrs. Roach's desk and started to suck on her fingers. While we wait, why don't you show me what sort of magic little Poppy can do? Right then. Come on, sweetheart, Mrs. Pendle said, tickling her daughter under the chin. Show this nice lady your tricks. Poppy blew a raspberry, but nothing happened. Make some chocolate birdies appear, her father encouraged. Poppy paid no attention, and it was only when the school secretary brought in a tea tray that she began to get excited. Is Poppy allowed a biscuit? Mrs. Roach said, offering round a plate of chocolate shortbread. We have a wonderful chef here at Rutherford. Everything's homemade. Poppy gurgled, bouncing up and down in her chair. Little marshmallow balls started to burst out of her lap and onto the desk, like popcorn exploding from a popcorn maker. One of them landed right in Mrs. Roach's cup of tea. Now, that's my clever girl, Mrs. Pendle said, planting a kiss on Poppy's forehead. The soft, sticky balls were bouncing about all over the room. But Poppy ignored them, munching away on a biscuit. When she had finished, she licked her fingers, gave a satisfied sigh, and blew out hundreds of tiny gold stars. Quite the show, huh? Mr. Pendle said, brushing bits of stardust off his suit. Unbelievable, Mrs. Roach agreed. I have never seen anything like it. Your daughter is extraordinary. Rutherford Academy would be honored to offer her a place. She is far too young now, of course, but when she's 7, we will be expecting her. Poppy scrunched up her face and blew a loud, windy raspberry. Pink, berry-shaped bubbles floated into the air, and when they popped, an overpowering stench of rotting fruit filled the room. Mrs. Roach gave a nervous laugh. It's a good thing your daughter's only 6 months old, she remarked. Otherwise, I might think she didn't want to come to Rutherford Academy at all. The older she got, the more apparent it became that it was cakes Poppy wanted to make and not spells. Around her 5th birthday, she discovered a cookbook, The Art of Simple Baking, lodged under the fridge and covered in dust. It had been a wedding present to the Pendles and was still in its cellophane wrapping. Poppy dug the book out and spent most of her free time studying the photographs of tarts and cakes and rich butter cookies. At first, her parents hadn't minded because it kept her from staring longingly out the window, waiting for the school bus to drive by. If Poppy had had her way, she'd be going to the local elementary school with all the other kids in Potts Bottom. But Mr. and Mrs. Pendle refused to send her. Apparently, 7 is the ideal age to begin learning for a witch, Edith Pendle told Poppy. They have different methods up at that academy, and I don't want to interfere with them, sweetheart. Anyway, I'm not sure I want you mixing with non-magic children, she had said. You're special, Poppy, and Poppy certainly seemed to be. She had managed to teach herself to read, just so she could try out the recipes printed in the Potts Bottom Gazette. All Poppy ever does is bake, Edith Pendle said, fretting to her best friend Maxine Gibbons one spring afternoon. Maxine lived next door, and they were talking across the backyard fence while Poppy lay on the grass, reading her newest edition of Good Eats magazine. She had bought herself a subscription with her birthday money when she turned 6, and loved to pore over the pictures. I don't know where she gets it from. I really don't. Certainly not me. Edith gave a nervous laugh. What's wrong with a nice box mix, might I ask? Maxine giggled. Well, she was born in a French bakery. Yes, but we don't mention that in front of her, Edith Pendle said, lowering her voice. Honestly, Maxine, that is not something Poppy needs to know about. She'd want to buy bread there or find out how they make those fancy cakes. Mrs. Pendle studied her daughter longingly. I just don't understand it. I really don't. She shook her head and sighed. What Poppy should be doing is concentrating on her magic. So when is her first day at Rutherford? Maxine Gibbons asked. Not till September, but I'm so excited, Maxine. You should see the uniform, deep purple with gold trim. Poppy's going to look so smart. She doesn't seem very enthusiastic, does she? Maxine said. No, Poppy's mother frowned. Thank goodness she won't have time for this ridiculous cooking nonsense when she starts school. Maxine shrieked with laughter and called over to Poppy. You need to get cooking up some spells, my girl. Witches don't make cakes. They make magic. But I don't want to be a witch, Poppy whispered, wondering if there was something wrong with her. She wished she could stop herself from turning 7. Unfortunately, she knew that sort of magic was impossible for her. In a few months' time, whether she'd like it or not, she was going to be starting at Rutherford. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of First Chapter Fridays. That finishes the first chapter of The Power of Poppy Pendle by Natasha Lowe. Stop by the library to find out how Poppy's story ends. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition. I hope you join us for our next First Chapter Friday.